how are asset ratings managed on the platform? So asset ratings or driver behavior profiles are customizable. The platform, as you know, is customizable to your needs, and likewise with asset ratings. So these can be built at your leisure with the information you require or your customers require. So they can be built, as I said, based on your needs, based on your customers' needs, based on the asset types in a customer. And bear in mind that you can have more than one rating profile in a client. It's not restricted to one rating profile fits all, but you can build them if you have different types of vehicles that require different types of events or different types of penalties. So every trip that is taken, and a trip being defined as an ignition on to ignition off with a change in position and speed. So the vehicle turns on, moves from point A to point B, and switches off. Every one of those trips is rated out of 100. As I say, you can build the rating profile according to the asset type. So heavy vehicle you might want to penalize differently to a light vehicle. So you will have different rating profiles. Every trip rated out of 100, and events get assigned penalties that are deducted from that 100. So simply put, and we'll go through this, whenever you put a number for a penalty, that gets removed from the 100, and there is no limit to what the rating profile value could be, or the trip could be rated at. It could be 0, or it could be minus 100. It could be minus something else. The one other feature we have is you're able to assign costs to the events, and we will also show you this. Bottom line, if you know that harsh behavior or harsh braking costs, or potentially as a cost, you can assign it a value, 10 cent or 10 of 100, and this will be calculated over time to see what the costs are running per event. So that's the daily trip. So the day, or should I say the individual trips are, as I say, run out of 100 based on the events you've assigned, based on the points you've given. So daily, when we run a daily report, the daily rating is an average of the day's trips. So for example, if you have 3 trips of 90, 80, and 91, the day rating will be 87. So it's the rating divided by the number of trips, total of the ratings divided by number of trips. So the rating reports will display the rating and the points accumulated by the events, not the number of events, and we'll show you this. So that rating report that you run will pull out the rating, whether it be on the listing, so by each trip, or on the daily, and the rating will be the rating or the average rating for the day, and then the contribution of the points by the event, not the number of events. However, you can, under the trip listing report, pull the rating and the number of events if you know what are in your rating profile. And I'll explain what I mean by that shortly. The analytics reports can also give you the averages and the total number of events. So again, you can decide which of the reports fits your needs and which of the items you are looking for. If you're looking for the points contributed to the rating, then the rating reports are useful. If you're looking to see the number of events triggered that have contributed to the rating profile, then the other reports, the trip listing and the analytics reports, will give you that detail. So how are events used in the rating profile? So effectively, we get a star, and we'll come to that. And on the right-hand side, you'll see I've just added some events. So harsh braking, idling limits, or vehicle in range of or in a location they shouldn't be. So you can use any event that the device sends or the platform has been configured to create, and you can add those to a rating profile. On the left-hand side, the discussion we had last week in the previous webinar on speed, we talked about the tolerance and the profiles. Now, the speed tolerance is when you add a percentage overspeed limit to an asset. And as discussed last week, the red dot or the red X indicates the event that will be used in the rating profile. Notice there are 4 black X's. The only one that's going to contribute to the rating profile is the red X, the first one that you see in that list. Whereas if you're running overspeed profiles, the event occurs at the end, as explained before, but it takes into account all the events and gives you the total of the distance and the time. Whereas in the rating profile, and we will show you how to do this, the event happens at the end, and you can take into account those other events, and I will explain that. So just to reiterate, tolerance, if you set a tolerance on a vehicle using a percent, there is only one event that will trigger it, and that's the first one. So in that example I show you there, you will only get 1 point deducted or 1 penalty deduction. Whereas the profile, it's the same. There's 1 penalty deduction, but you can add in the other events by choosing a time and a distance factor. And I'll explain that when we get to the ratings. And on the right-hand side is explained any event that the device or the platform has been configured to trigger, you can add to a rating profile. Likewise, if there is no event, nothing will happen on the rating profile. So how do we display rating profiles on the platform? Simply put, in a star format, and you will see 3 options: a red star, a orange or amber star, and a green star. And those of you quick at maths will quickly deduce that each of those stars represents 33 1/3. So if you've got a rating of anything under 34, you will have a red star. 34 to 67, an amber star, and anything above 67 will be a green star. And that's simply how those represent. And bearing in mind, that's just a quick representation to have a look at a glance what is happening. And you can dive into the data using the reporting. So how do we display these? So on the overview screen, each of the trips under the activity tab, you can see the star next to the trip. And you can see by holding your mouse over the star, the rating will appear. So even though it's green, it's 90%. The red one below, would you believe, was minus 100. So holding your mouse over the star will indicate the rating value. Once you actually open the trip, the rating will appear on the details section, and you will not only get the rating, you will also get which penalties have triggered. And you can immediately see in this example that there have been 2 instances of harsh braking. They have counted towards the score of 10. So 10 has been deducted from 100, which means each of those harsh braking penalties are worth 5. So let's now dive into the platform, have a look at this, set up a rating profile, and show you how to use the speeding. And we can then have a look at this in a bit more detail. So all right, in front of you, you will see the platform with a client with multiple assets. And each one of these have been set up differently with ratings, with speed profiles and so forth. But let's show you how we build a rating profile. Because events occur on the assets in the client, we have to build the rating profile at the client level under the profile section, asset rating profiles. And it's simply a case of clicking the addition button, giving your rating profile a name, okay? So as previously said in the other webinars, give this a good description. So if we wanted a light vehicle rating profile, we would name it accordingly. If we wanted a heavy vehicle, personnel, trailers, whatever the case may be, give it a good description, because remember, there's no restriction on the number of rating profiles. You can add as many as you like until the software tells you to stop. So we give it a name and we finish that profile. Now you'll notice on the right-hand side that the software is telling us that actually nothing will happen until you add some penalties. And penalties come from events. So we go in, we edit the profile and add the penalties. Now, again, what you name the penalty will appear on the front end of the software. Okay, so if you give the penalty harsh braking, for example, that's what you're going to see in the trip details. You are not going to see anything other than that name in the trip details. Same in the reporting. So call it something specific, again, so that it makes sense to you and your customer. Simply put, add a penalty. How many points am I deducting from 100? Okay, so let's make that 2. And for the case of those customers who like simple maths, maybe they don't want a penalty rating to go below 100, you can actually stipulate a maximum. So if we had 5 penalty options and the customer said they don't want to see minuses on the platform, you could take those 5 and give them a maximum penalty of 20. And what that means is there will be 10 harsh braking events, which will contribute -20 to the rating, but the next harsh braking will do nothing. And again, this is only really useful if your customer says they don't want to see minuses, or they want everything in a nice, neat bundle. Otherwise, leave it at 100, and then you can have 50 harsh brakings, and everything else, the triggers will be minus value on the trip rating. As mentioned, you can assign a cost, and you can assign a cost of whatever value, whether it be in decimal or whether it be in a whole value. And so currency is not an issue. It's just really assigning a cost per event, so that if you have 100 events, you know that it's costing you 10 of that currency, for example. Right. So now we get to the meat of it. And the first thing to understand is I can add any event under this event filter. But if that event does not come from the device or does not trigger using whatever setup I've got on the platform, then that event or that penalty will never trigger. So let's go down to triggered event, and under here, I look for harsh brake. And there, in simple terms, is the first penalty. Now, the power of the platform is you can be very generic. Great, they trigger a harsh braking event. Wonderful, 2 points deduction. But what if your customer says, I'm not worried about a harsh braking at low speed for whatever reason? Maybe they've got precious cargo and they're saying at low speed, there's less damage, but at high speed, there's going to be a lot more damage. So we can add, using the and, speed, and choose if they brake and their speed is higher than 80 kilometers an hour, because that's the decision that they've made, you can now start to get very, very specific. So maybe I only want to know if they speed above 80 kilometers an hour, and maybe you might say it's within a particular zone or a time of day, or the driver is a certain person, or ignition in this case will always be on, or maybe the ignition state of something is on or off. So as I'm saying, you can build a very generic or a very specific rating profile. And that's just one event. So I'll add that one and it will appear there. Now let's do speeding. Okay, and again, we could get very specific in the name. So let's say we chose low band speeding because we've set up an overspeed profile and we are going to look at the low band in that profile, and maybe we're not too worried about the penalty, we're not too worried about the cost. And here what we do is we choose overspeed. And the important thing is under overspeed, you will now see two options, start and band. Now, if you remember my picture that I showed you earlier, there were crosses for the different types of speeding. Tolerance happens at the beginning, i.e. the start. So if I have vehicles where I have set up the tolerance, not the band, I would choose start because that is the first event. If I have set up an overspeed profile and I want to choose a specific band, I will choose band. So simply put, tolerance, overspeed profile. Okay, so let's choose band. We now choose our overspeeding profile that we've built. Ours is called ABC, and we know we want to use the low, we choose low. Now, remember what I said about overspeed profiles. The events trigger at the end. So what that means is, let's take an example where a driver goes into the low band and they sit there for 1 second because they literally overtake a vehicle and then they go back down. Would I want to penalize this driver? Maybe not. So I can add an extra, notice this is different to the harsh braking now, where I could add the distance or the time spent in that band. So if I go and do duration, I would say I want to know if they speed and they are greater than 10 seconds. Now what I'm doing is eliminating anything that will create more unnecessary noise in my rating profile. And you can see if we now change this to high and we change this to the high and we say, okay, if my driver sits in the high band for 30 seconds, I might want to give them a higher penalty. So on the speeding profile, you're able to eliminate the issue of unnecessary events and multiple penalties by adding the duration or the distance. Bearing in mind, it's not good to add both because if you do duration, it will be a certain distance based at a certain speed and you're covering your bases. Also, remember that your update frequency on your device, if you choose to set the device to update every kilometer or 30 seconds, that would effectively match 1 kilometer. So you could even set that at a higher number, knowing full well if somebody's driving on the highway at high speed, 30 seconds is only 1 or 2 data points. You could make it something unique like 45. And this is where the power comes in. We will eliminate all of the other fluff, all of the other events where somebody is literally just overtaking another vehicle. And again, I could, if you really want to, speed will not be important, but you can add in other factors that you might find important. Now, I'm not sure, maybe if you're worried about they're in a specific zone, but the rest, as you see, you can run during the specific time of day and so forth. So once we add that, that will now pull through. And if I were to go and use the start, this is the tolerance. Okay, you will notice there is no distance and duration because we're not measuring that. So this is now, I could be very specific by adding a speed to my event, bearing in mind it is the start of the speeding. and I can go and add in a speed. So maybe I want to say, I only want to know if my driver goes above 130. Now, only when the driver drives above 130, and that is the first data point on the speeding event, will this trigger. So again, you can build this as specific as you want to try and eliminate any unnecessary events. So bearing in mind, if I have tolerances on some vehicles and bans on other, I could build a whole rating profile with mix of tolerance and bans, or I can build it specific to bans or tolerance and have two different rating profiles. So maybe I would call this one bans and then, or profiles, and then I would call the other one tolerances. Coming back to the events, just as mentioned earlier, so anything that is appearing in this drop-down list can be added. But if, for example, I choose excessive idle and I haven't set up an idling limit on my vehicle, this will never trigger. So bear in mind, it's important to make sure that the software is set up, that the events you're looking for will trigger, and so therefore you eliminate any unnecessary pain going back and trying to figure out why the customer is telling you that things are not working. So here, for example, again, you could choose to be specific if they are idling inside a specific zone. If they're not allowed to idle in the customer's zone, for example, a depot, you could add a specific zone and say that they're not allowed to do that inside and any location, for example. Again, being quite specific, okay? Idling in customer depot. And again, this will show up under the details. This will pull through on the reporting, and being very specific, I might want to add in a higher penalty. And there is my rating profile. That might just be what my customer is looking for. And you can see that if each one of those events triggers, we would get 17 points deducted from 100. Ultimately, if there's a lot of speeding, it would take a lot of points off the rating profile. So then the rating profile is saved like that, and then assigned to whichever asset you would like to assign it to. First, check there is a rating profile on these vehicles, but it's a simple case of choosing that new rating profile by clicking there, or as one tends to do in the new UI, do it in bulk if all the vehicles require that rating profile, or if, as mentioned earlier, you have a specific group of vehicles, and let's say we only want to apply this to the cars, I can now assign it to the cars. Or if I've got trucks, I'm not sure we have any trucks, we have one truck, okay, I could assign it. This vehicle is sitting in multiple groups, so it's going to pop up all over the place. But again, I can filter my vehicles down to a group and then assign the rating profile relevant to that group. Okay, so very, very specifically able to add the rating profile to a specific vehicle or a group of vehicles or a driver and a group of drivers. So that's how we build the rating profile, and that's how it pulls through into the overview screen. So let's have a look at one or two of these. So there's one, and you can see that's a rating profile of 95, a rating profile of 100. And if I click that trip, go into the trip, it'll tell me I went into my low speeding area on my other rating profile. I did it once, and it is a score of 5. And we can see it actually on the graph. It's that data point there, if I can put my mouse above it, where I've just gone above the speed looks like, okay? So very low speeding event, but such is life. We get penalized no matter. And I will show you an example of this, where this particular trip, the rating profile was a minus 100. And it wasn't deliberate or set to go to minus 100. It landed on minus 100. And you can see that the high speeding events, there were 11 of them counted, took 100% off. Now, I'm not sure why we've chosen a value of whatever, 9 point something, but that is being deducted from that score. So that made it 0. We had 6 medium speeding, and you can see that's a point score of 10 or penalty score, and a harsh braking score of 8 or 40, which means that 8 events times 5 gives me a score of 40. So there is a nice quick snapshot of A, what has triggered, and B, getting a sense of what's in the rating profile. Now, how do we show these in reporting formats? So let's start. There is a separate section for ratings, and simply put, you can do by trip or by day. And as mentioned, when we run these reports, and I'm going to open the ones I ran earlier, the details per trip gives me the rating per trip and the total of the event that has contributed to the score. So high speeding in this example there is 20 and the rating is 80. So it's not there were 20 events, it's that the high speeding contributed 20 points. The medium speeding in this example contributed 10 and the low speeding 5, giving us a rating of 85. So that is the details per trip. The totals per day, it is the same kind of thing. We've got a rating value. We've got the score that's been contributed by that event type. And notice the score correlates 97.5, 2.5, and so forth. So everything you see in the event column is related to the score that is contributed to the rating. Now, I just want to go back a step to the report itself. When we run any rating report, whether it be details per trip, whether it be totals per day, the one thing you will see not appearing in the columns is which events contribute to this rating profile. Reason being, you can imagine the number of rating profiles out in the wilderness and with your customers, and each one can be very specific. And the idea then is once the report runs, the report will populate with the events that you have in the rating profile that you've chosen to run in the report. So that's why they don't appear there and cannot be edited up front. So going one step further, in the analytics, the trip analytics is the one where we can add a rating profile. And this is where, again, notice we don't have the actual penalties that are applied, but you can get a total of the types of penalties and the events of the penalties, i.e. the number of penalties. And when we run the trip analytics, we get the data like we've seen before, and we can drill down, for example, onto the rating value for the total of our company or our client, and we're able to then drill into each vehicle and see the rating profile or the rating total per vehicle, and we can sort that data from top to bottom or bottom to top, depending how we like our graph or our customers. There is from bottom to top. I can add the data label on there, and as importantly, I can add the average. Now, we have done a webinar on the analytics, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. Suffice to say that this data that we have here, we can create a per vehicle rating value for the time frame in question, or we can roll up our vehicles and see the data per day And I may have clicked too fast because it's probably still waiting to pull the data. And then we can split the data down into the day, and then you can see the rating for my fleet per day. And we can start seeing the values per day. Now, this is not per vehicle, but by fleet. So I will show you a dashboard I've prepared, and I will show you how the values look. But you can see one report, multiple outputs. Whether I want to look at my fleet, whether I want to look at particular vehicles. And remember, once you've built this into a dashboard, you are able to build that dashboard or add that dashboard as a template. Sorry, I had deleted those other dashboards, which is why that error was showing up. So this dashboard shows a report like I've just shown you. Rating is always in red in my head, so therefore I make it red. This is the ratings by vehicle for 30 days. Notice those are my titles, again, very specific, showing us which vehicles and the average for the fleet. Then on the right-hand side, this is, I've just added the rating value, which is the line graph, and then the distance driven for the fleet per day. So we can, again, see whether there's any correlation between distance and rating. And to be honest, it doesn't look like there is. If we remove the distance, there's my rating. And you can see like the day with the lowest rating doesn't have the highest distance. So we can see that value quite easily. That's just an example. And that is just by choosing distance and rating and adding the distance to the right. So the values on the right, changing the color and keeping the rating on the left and making it a line graph. That's all we did there. Further to that, here is this graph with the number of events that have occurred in each vehicle. So you can see straight off that the Toyota has the lowest rating and it has the highest number of penalty events, which makes sense, although sometimes if you penalize certain events higher, this may not be the case. So we can see each vehicle with a number of penalty events, not which type. The graph on the right shows us each type of penalty and how many have triggered in each of the vehicles. So you can see immediately the Toyota has got low speeding, medium speeding, and high speeding, lots of incidences. And how do I get this data? When this report finishes, the events that are in my rating profile open up, and I can add those to my graph, and I have put the rating profile on the left-hand side. I've put all the events on the right-hand side, and I've stacked that graph. So there's a lot of power that you can give your customer. And again, I can save this as a template, and my customer can run this on their rating profile and get a similar picture. Obviously, we don't need all three. It's just to show you what can be represented in the analytics. So rating profiles, highly customizable. Choose your penalties based on the customer's requirements. You can be very generic or you can be very specific with your rating profile events and the penalties. Those will then pull through on various places on the platform to people to get a representative look. There are reports that you can run manually and you can schedule for your customers that will give you the rating, whether it be the actual rating per trip or the average rating per day, with the score that has been contributed by the event type. And you have the analytics tool where you can build very, very unique and fancy graphs that give your clients an overview of their fleet or the specific vehicles